It was supposed to be the proudest day of my life. I had pressed my Navy suit to perfection, polished my old military medals, and even got a fresh haircut to look my best for my son Michael's high school graduation. After 15 years of being a single dad, watching him walk across that stage would be the moment that made all our struggles worthwhile. I never expected it to become the day that would shake the very foundation of our relationship. The morning held that special kind of promise that seems reserved for life's milestone moments. Sunlight streamed through my bedroom window as I stood before the mirror, adjusting my tie for what must have been the 10th time. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The house was quiet. Michael had spent the night at his mother Sarah's place, as he sometimes did before big events. She had insisted on helping him prepare for the ceremony, and though it stung a little, I had learned to pick my battles over the years. My hands traced over the medals on my chest, bronze stars and commendations from my time in the Marines. Michael had always been fascinated by them when he was younger, asking me to tell him stories about my service. Back then, I was his hero. His dad, the Marine, the man who had raised him since he was 5, when Sarah decided her career opportunities in Chicago were more important than our family in Madison. I checked my phone. A message from Michael glowed on the screen. "Can't wait to see you, Dad. Save me a big cheer when they call my name." A smile tugged at my lips. Despite everything Sarah had done to distance us over the years, Michael and I had maintained a bond that I thought was unshakable. The kind of bond forged through countless late-night homework sessions, weekend fishing trips, and heart-to-heart talks about girls, college, and life. The graduation was being held at Madison Central High's football stadium, the only venue large enough to accommodate the 1,000-plus people expected to attend. I arrived early, wanting to secure a good seat where Michael could easily spot me in the crowd. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and early summer flowers. Other parents were already filing in, their faces bright with anticipation and pride. As I made my way through the parking lot, I spotted Sarah's sleek Tesla Model X, a not-so-subtle reminder of her success as a corporate attorney. She had done well for herself in Chicago, I had to admit. The sight of her car brought back memories of the day she left, telling me she felt suffocated by small-town life in Madison. Michael had been too young to understand then, clinging to my leg as her car disappeared down our street. I had done my best to shield him from the bitterness of our divorce, never speaking ill of his mother despite the pain her abandonment had caused. When she started flying him to Chicago for weekend visits, I encouraged him to go, knowing he needed his mother in his life. Even when those visits began stretching longer and her influence grew stronger, I kept my feelings to myself. She's still his mother, I would remind myself during sleepless nights. The stadium was beginning to fill as I found a seat in the middle section, close enough to see the stage clearly. I noticed Sarah's distinctive red hair several rows ahead, but something seemed different. There was a man with her, tall, professionally dressed in what looked like an expensive suit. I had heard Michael mention her new boyfriend James a few times, but this was my first time seeing him. Parents around me chatted excitedly, sharing stories about their graduating seniors and plans for college. The woman next to me proudly told me her daughter was headed to UCLA in the fall. "What about your son?" she asked kindly. "Michael's going to Wisconsin," I replied, my chest swelling with pride. Full academic scholarship. It had been one of the happiest days of my life when that acceptance letter arrived. The band began playing as the graduates filed in, their blue and white gowns swaying in the morning breeze. I searched the rows of students until I spotted Michael, walking tall and proud. Our eyes met across the distance, and he gave me a small wave. My heart felt like it might burst. This was my boy, my son, the center of my world for the past 15 years. Principal Anderson approached the podium, his voice booming over the speakers as he welcomed everyone to Madison Central's graduation ceremony. As he spoke about the accomplishments of the class of 2025, I noticed Sarah and her boyfriend standing up, making their way toward the front of the stadium. Something about their movement seemed purposeful, rehearsed even. I thought back to the past few months, how Michael had seemed slightly distant, always a bit distracted when we talked. He had been spending more time in Chicago, saying he needed to prepare for college with his mom. At the time, I had attributed it to normal teenage independence, but now, watching Sarah and James position themselves near the stage, an uneasy feeling began to grow in my stomach. The principal was still speaking, but his words had become background noise to my growing sense of disquiet. Something was about to happen, something that would change everything. I just didn't know what. Before we begin presenting diplomas, Principal Anderson announced, we have a special request from one of our graduating families. He gestured toward where Sarah and James stood, and my world began to tilt on its axis. The next few moments would redefine everything I thought I knew about my relationship with my son. Sarah approached the microphone with that confident stride I remembered so well from our marriage days. She wore a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, her red hair styled perfectly despite the morning breeze. James stood slightly behind her, his hand resting possessively on her lower back. The gesture made my stomach turn. "Thank you, Principal Anderson," Sarah began, her voice carrying that practiced warmth she used in courtrooms. "As many of you know, our son Michael has been an exceptional student here at Madison Central." She emphasized the word "our" while looking directly at me, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "But what many of you don't know is how much support he's received from someone very special over the past 2 years. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, my military training the only thing keeping me from visibly reacting. The past 2 years. My mind raced back through recent memories, trying to piece together what I might have missed. Michael had been spending more weekends in Chicago, sure, but I had attributed that to normal teenage independence and his mother's increasing influence. "James has been more than just my partner," Sarah continued, her voice thick with emotion. That seemed rehearsed to my ears. "He's become a true father figure to Michael, helping him with college applications, teaching him about business and investments, and showing him what a modern, successful man looks like." Each word felt like a deliberate jab at my blue-collar background, my simple life as a construction project manager in Madison. The crowd murmured appreciatively, completely unaware of how each word was dismantling 15 years of fatherhood. I looked around, wondering if anyone else could see through this performance. The woman who had spoken to me earlier about UCLA gave me a concerned glance, perhaps noticing how tightly I was gripping the armrests of my chair. "So today," Sarah's voice rose with practiced emotion, "we'd like to recognize James, not just as my partner, but as the dad Michael has chosen to help guide him into his college years and beyond." She turned to James, who stepped forward with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to commanding attention. "James has something he'd like to say." My ears were ringing now, the world seeming to blur around the edges. "Chosen?" The word echoed in my head like a gunshot. How could Michael choose a different father? I had been there for every skinned knee, every baseball game, every nightmare and triumph. When he struggled with algebra in freshman year, I had stayed up countless nights helping him study. When his first girlfriend broke his heart, I was the one who took him camping to help him heal. James adjusted the microphone, his expensive watch catching the morning sun. "Thank you, Sarah." His voice was smooth, educated, the kind of voice that belonged in corporate boardrooms and country clubs. "Michael, son, your mother and I want you to know how proud we are of you today. These past 2 years watching you grow into a remarkable young man have been an incredible privilege. Son, He had called my son, son. My hands began to shake, and I forced them flat against my thighs, fighting to maintain composure. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Around me, other parents were smiling, nodding, completely oblivious to the way my world was crumbling. A few even whispered about how touching this moment was. When your mother first introduced us, James continued, I knew you were special. Your intelligence, your drive to succeed, your natural business acumen, all qualities I see in myself. That's why I'm not just here today as your mother's partner, but as someone who wants to officially be your father. The word father hit me like a physical blow. I looked toward the rows of graduates, searching for Michael's face among the sea of blue and white gowns. I found him near the front, beaming up at James with an expression of pure admiration, an expression that used to be reserved for me. Which is why, James reached into his jacket pocket, I want to present you with this. He held up what appeared to be a small box. Your acceptance letter to the University of Chicago's business program arrived last week. Your mother and I would be honored if you'd consider accepting both this opportunity and my offer to officially adopt you as my son. The stadium erupted in applause, but I barely heard it over the roaring in my ears. University of Chicago? But Michael was supposed to attend Wisconsin. We had planned it together, celebrated his scholarship together. When had this changed? How long had they been planning this? Through the chaos in my mind, I remembered conversations that suddenly took on new meaning. Michael's increasing questions about business careers instead of the engineering path we'd discussed. His growing interest in investment banking rather than the hands-on work I'd taught him. The way he'd started comparing Madison to Chicago, making subtle comments about moving up in the world. Sarah was speaking again, but her words seemed to come from far away. And now, to make this moment even more special, we'd like to invite Michael's dad to join us on stage when his name is called. James, would you do the honors? The crowd's attention shifted, following Sarah's gesture not toward me, but toward James, who stood tall and proud, already moving toward the steps to the stage. My chest felt tight, years of military discipline barely containing the storm of emotions threatening to break free. Then Principal Anderson's voice cut through the chaos. Actually, I see here that Marcus Reynolds is listed as Michael's legal father. Mr. Reynolds, would you please come to the stage? The silence that followed was deafening. The stadium seemed to hold its breath as Principal Anderson's words hung in the air. I could feel hundreds of eyes turning toward me, their gazes, a mix of curiosity and dawning understanding. Sarah's perfectly composed face cracked for just a moment, her eyes flashing with that familiar anger I remembered from our divorce. James stood frozen on the steps to the stage, one foot awkwardly suspended mid-stride. I rose slowly from my seat, my military training kicking in automatically, shoulders back, spine straight, chin up. The medals on my chest caught the morning sun, a reminder of battles fought and won. This, I realized, would be another kind of battle, one fought not with weapons, but with truth and dignity, Mr. Reynolds. Principal Anderson's voice carried a note of concern now, perhaps sensing the tension that had descended over the stadium. Please, join us on stage for your son's diploma presentation. Each step down the aisle felt like walking through deep water. Parents and families parted before me, their expressions a mix of sympathy and discomfort. The woman who had chatted with me earlier about UCLA reached out briefly, touching my arm in a gesture of support. I nodded slightly, grateful for this small kindness from a stranger. As I approached the stage, I could see Michael more clearly now. He sat among his fellow graduates, his face a storm of emotions, embarrassment, confusion, and something else that cut me deep. Guilt. He knew. He had known about this plan, this attempt to replace me, to rewrite our history together. Sarah recovered quickly, her lawyer's instincts taking over. She stepped forward, speaking in a low, urgent voice that nonetheless carried in the tense. Silence. Marcus, don't make a scene. This is Michael's day. The irony of her words might have made me laugh if the situation weren't so painful. I had spent 15 years making sure everything in Michael's life was about him, not about my feelings toward his mother, not about my own sacrifices. Even now, my first instinct was to protect him from this public spectacle. I'm not the one. Making a scene, Sarah, I replied quietly, my voice steady despite the emotion churning inside. I'm just here to see my son graduate. James finally moved from his awkward position on the steps, adjusting his expensive tie as he approached. Marcus, he said, extending his hand as if we were meeting at a business lunch, perhaps we should discuss this privately after the ceremony. I looked at his offered hand, then at the box, still visible in his other pocket, the box containing an acceptance letter that would take my son not just to another school, but into another life entirely. A life where I would be gradually erased, replaced by this man who thought fatherhood could be bought with promises of business connections and financial success. There's nothing to discuss, I said, moving past him toward the stage steps. Principal Anderson called my name, not yours. The microphone was still on, picking up fragments of our exchange. A murmur ran through the crowd, phones appearing in hands as people sensed the drama unfolding. This would probably end up on social media, I realized. Another modern humiliation to endure. Principal Anderson, bless him, attempted to regain control of the situation. Ladies and gentlemen, let's proceed with the diploma presentations. James, Sarah, if you could please return to your seats. But Sarah wasn't finished. She stepped between me and the stairs, her voice taking on that razor edge I remembered from our worst arguments. You can't keep holding him back, Marcus. Michael deserves every opportunity to succeed, to rise above. She glanced around at our small-town surroundings, her disdain evident. All this. Her words struck an old wound, one that had never fully healed. The constant implication that my life, my values, my way of raising our son was somehow inferior to her ambitious vision. I had given Michael everything I had: love, time, guidance, stability. I had taught him about honor, hard work, and what it meant to be a man of integrity. Rise above what, Sarah? I asked, my voice carrying clearly across the now silent stadium. Above having a father who showed up every day, who coached his little league teams, who taught him to fish, to change a tire, to stand up for what's right. I touched the medals on my chest. Above serving your country, above honest work that builds something real. The crowd stirred, and I saw several veterans in the audience stand slightly straighter, their own medals and service pins glinting in the morning light. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about values, about what we teach our children about success and worth. Dad, Michael's voice cut through the tension. He had left his seat and was walking toward us, his graduation gown billowing, slightly in the breeze. Dad, I can explain. The word Dad from his lips had never sounded so uncertain, so weighted with complication. In that moment, looking at my son's face, I saw both the little boy I had raised and the young man being pulled in another direction. The crack that had been forming in our relationship was now fully visible, a chasm of different values and aspirations. Michael, return to your seat, Sarah commanded, but he kept walking toward me. Son, James called out at the same time. The word an obvious attempt to assert his claim, but Michael's eyes were fixed on me, on the medals he had once touched with such pride, on the face that had been his first image of what a father should be. In his expression, I saw the battle being waged for his future, his identity, his understanding of what really matters in life. Principal Anderson's voice crackled over the speakers, trying to restore order to the rapidly deteriorating situation. Please, everyone, let's remember this is a graduation ceremony. We have over 300 students waiting to receive their diplomas." But his words seemed distant, secondary to the drama unfolding at the foot of the stage. Michael reached me. First, his face flushed with a mix of emotions I couldn't quite read. Up close, I noticed things I hadn't seen before. The expensive watch on his wrist that hadn't been there last week. The designer shoes peeking out from under his graduation gown. Small signs of James's influence creeping into my son's life. "Dad," he said again, softer this time, meant just for me. "I was going to tell you about Chicago. I didn't know how." Before I could respond, Sarah's sharp voice cut through the moment. "Michael, you don't need to explain yourself. We've discussed this. Your future is what matters now." She placed a manicured hand on his shoulder, trying to guide him away from me. "James has connections at the University of Chicago. The business program there will open doors that Wisconsin never could." The crowd watched in tense silence as this private family drama played out in public. Phones were still recording, documenting every painful moment. I could almost see the social media posts now. Drama at Madison Central graduation or rich stepdad versus real dad showdown. But this wasn't entertainment. This was my life, my son, my 15 years of fatherhood being rewritten. Connections, I found myself saying, my voice carrying across the stadium's unnatural quiet. "Is that what you think makes a father, Sarah? Connections and business programs?" James stepped forward, his corporate confidence slightly shaken but still intact. "Marcus, let's be reasonable here. This is about Michael's future. The opportunities I can provide." Opportunities? The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Like the opportunity to learn that promises mean nothing, that loyalty can be bought, that the father who raised you can be replaced if someone with a bigger wallet comes along. My words hit home. I saw Michael flinch, saw the first crack in James's polished facade. Even Sarah's practiced composure wavered for a moment. Mr. Reynolds, Principal Anderson, had descended from the stage, perhaps sensing things were about to escalate further. "Perhaps we could take this discussion inside. The other families." "No," I interrupted, my voice firm but controlled. "No more private discussions, no more secrets." I turned to face the crowd, my military bearing automatic in moments of stress. "You all want to know what's happening here. I'll tell you. This is what happens when people think success only means money and status. When they forget that being a father means more than writing checks and making connections. The medals on my chest seem to weigh heavier now. 15 years ago, when Sarah left for Chicago, I was the one who stayed. I was the one who taught Michael to ride a bike, who helped him with his homework, who held him when he cried. I was here every day doing the real work of being a father. "That's enough, Marcus," Sarah snapped, but I wasn't finished. "I taught him about honor," I continued, my voice growing stronger, "about keeping your word, about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard." I turned to Michael, seeing both the man he was becoming and the boy he had been. I taught him that real success isn't about money or connections. It's about character, about integrity, about being someone others can count on. "Dad, please." Michael's voice cracked slightly. "It's not like that. James isn't replacing you. He's just what, son? Just offering you a different life, a better father. Is that what this is about?" The silence that followed was deafening. In that moment, I saw something shift in Michael's eyes, recognition, perhaps, of the weight of what was happening here. This wasn't just about college choices or career paths. This was about values, about loyalty, about what kind of man he wanted to become. James cleared his throat, apparently deciding to try a different approach. "Marcus, no one is trying to erase your role in Michael's life. We're simply offering him additional opportunities, a chance to..." To what? I cut him off. To be ashamed of where he comes from, to think that the life we built here isn't good enough, to believe that fathers are interchangeable if the price is right. The crowd had grown completely still, the only sound the rustle of the wind through the stadium flags. Even the younger siblings, who had been fidgeting in their seats, were quiet. Sensing the gravity of what was unfolding, Principal Anderson made one final attempt to salvage the ceremony. Please, let's remember why we're here today. These students have worked hard to reach this moment. His words triggered something in me, a memory of all the moments that had led to this day. The late-night study sessions, the college application, essays I'd helped Michael proofread, the proud moment when his Wisconsin acceptance letter arrived. All of it now overshadowed by this public attempt to rewrite our story. I looked at my son, really looked at him, seeing the struggle playing out behind his eyes. "Michael," I said, my voice softer now, meant just for him despite the microphones picking up every word. "You don't have to choose between success and integrity. You don't have to deny who you are or where you come from to become who you want to be." The truth of those words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with meaning. This wasn't just about today anymore. It was about the kind of legacy we leave, the examples we set, the values we pass on to our children. The tension in the stadium had reached a breaking point. My words about integrity and values hung in the air, and I could see them landing differently with different people. Some parents nodded in understanding, perhaps thinking of their own family struggles. Others shifted uncomfortably, the raw honesty of the moment too intense for what should have been a celebratory occasion. Principal Anderson seized the momentary silence to take control. "We will take a brief 5-minute recess," he announced, his voice firm but diplomatic. "Graduates, please remain in your seats. Parents, we ask for your patience and understanding." But Michael stepped forward before anyone could move, his voice stronger than I'd heard it all day. "No!" he said, loud enough for the microphone to catch. "No more breaks. No more hiding things." He turned to face me, his shoulders straight, looking more like the man I'd raised than the polished version James and Sarah had been trying to create. "Dad," he began, and this time there was no uncertainty about who he was addressing. "I messed up. I got caught up in everything Mom and James were offering. The connections, the prestige, the promise of an easier path." He glanced down at his expensive watch, then deliberately removed it, letting it dangle from his fingers. "But I forgot something important along the way." Sarah moved to interrupt, but Michael held up his hand, a gesture so reminiscent of my own that it made my heart clench. "Mom, please, for once just listen." The authority in his voice seemed to surprise her into silence. This wasn't her compliant son anymore, but a young man finding his own voice. "When I was 10, Michael continued, now addressing the crowd as much as me, "I wanted to quit Little League. I was the worst player on the team, and some kids were giving me a hard time about it. But Dad, my real dad, wouldn't let me quit. Instead, he spent every evening after work practicing with me in the backyard. For months, no matter how tired he was from construction sites, no matter what the weather was like." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "He told me something I never forgot. He said, 'Son, life isn't about being the best. It's about being your best. And sometimes, being your best means getting back up when everyone expects you to stay down.'" The memory hit me hard. Those evening practices, the way Michael's face would light up when he finally connected with the ball, the lesson about perseverance being more important than natural talent. It was one of countless moments we'd shared, moments that had shaped both of us. "By the end of that season," Michael went on, "I wasn't the best player, but I wasn't the worst either. More importantly, I learned what it meant to face challenges head on, to work hard for something instead of looking for an easy way out." He looked directly at James. "No amount of connections can teach you that." James shifted uncomfortably, his corporate polish seeming suddenly out of place. The acceptance letterbox in his pocket might as well have been made of lead for how heavily it seemed to weigh on him now. "Michael," Sarah's voice had taken on a warning tone. "Think about what you're doing, the opportunities you'd be giving up." Opportunities. Michael cut her off, an edge entering his voice. Like the opportunity to pretend the last 15 years didn't happen. To act like success only comes from wearing the right clothes and knowing the right people. He gestured to my medals. "Dad taught me that real success comes from who you are, not what you own." The crowd had grown completely silent, caught up in this raw moment of truth. Even the younger siblings, who had been fidgeting in their seats, were still sensing they were witnessing something important. "When you left," Michael continued, now speaking directly to his mother, "Dad never said a bad word about you. Not one. Even when I was angry, even when I didn't understand why you chose your career over us, he always said, 'Your mother loves you in her own way.' He taught me that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but it does mean not letting bitterness control you." Sarah's carefully composed facade cracked slightly, a flash of genuine emotion crossing her face. Perhaps she was remembering the woman she'd been 15 years ago, the choices she'd made, the consequences that had rippled through all our lives. And now, Michael's voice grew stronger, "You and James think you can just rewrite that history? Replace years of real fatherhood with promises of business connections and social status?" He shook his head, looking suddenly older, wiser. "That's not how it works. That's not who I want to be." The watch in his hand caught the morning sun as he turned to James. "I appreciate what you were trying to offer. Maybe you even meant well. But I already have a father. One who taught me that character matters more than connections, that integrity isn't something you can buy, and that real success isn't about climbing social ladders." The stadium remained hushed, hundreds of people collectively holding their breath as my son made his stand. In that moment, I saw not just the boy I'd raised, but the man he'd become. Someone who understood the difference between price and value, between status and worth. Principal Anderson stepped forward again, perhaps sensing a resolution was near. But before he could speak, Michael had one more thing to say. He turned back to me, his eyes clear and determined. "Dad, I don't need another father. I don't need expensive watches or corporate connections. What I need, what I've always had, is a dad who shows up, who teaches by example, who understands that some things matter more than money." The weight of the medals on my chest suddenly felt lighter, balanced by the weight lifting from my heart. This was my son, my boy, choosing not just me, but the values we'd built our life around. In his eyes, I saw not just love, but understanding. The kind that comes from recognizing truth when it's been temporarily obscured by glitter and promises. The aftermath of Michael's declaration rippled through the stadium like a wave. Parents who had been recording the scene on their phones slowly lowered them, perhaps realizing they were witnessing something too personal, too real for social media. The morning sun felt warmer somehow, as if nature itself was acknowledging the truth that had just been spoken. Sarah was the first to break the heavy silence, her lawyer's instincts kicking in to try and salvage the situation. "Michael, sweetheart, you're emotional right now. We can discuss this later, in private. Where—" "No, Mom," Michael interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "No more private discussions, no more hidden agendas." He turned to face the crowd, the watch still dangling from his hand. "Everyone here needs to understand something. Success isn't just about money or status. It's about knowing who you are and standing up for what you believe in." James took a step forward, his corporate confidence visibly shaken, but still trying to maintain control. "Son," he began, but Michael cut him off. "I'm not your son," he said quietly. "And buying me expensive gifts, offering me connections, trying to replace the father who actually raised me, that doesn't make you my father. It just shows you don't understand what fatherhood really means." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. I watched as James's face flushed, his carefully constructed world of influence and money suddenly powerless in the face of authentic emotion and genuine relationships. Principal Anderson, showing remarkable sensitivity to the moment, stepped back to the microphone. "Perhaps we should proceed with the diploma presentations," he suggested gently. "Michael, would you return to your seat? Mr. Reynolds, you're welcome to join us on stage when your son's name is called." But Sarah wasn't. Finished, her face had taken on that determined look I remembered from our divorce proceedings, the one that said she wouldn't let go of control without a fight. "Marcus," she said, her voice carrying across the stadium, "you've poisoned him against us." Filled his head with old-fashioned ideas about... Old-fashioned? Michael's laugh was sharp, unexpected. "You mean like honesty, integrity, actually being there for your kid?" He shook his head, looking at his mother with a mixture of sadness and understanding that seemed beyond his years. "Dad never poisoned me against anyone. In fact, he's the reason I still have a relationship with you at all." The crowd stirred at this revelation, and I saw several parents nodding in recognition. They understood the challenge of co-parenting, of putting children's needs above personal grievances. "When you left," Michael continued, his voice softer, "now, when you chose Chicago and your career over us, Dad was the one who made sure I didn't grow up bitter. He kept your picture on my nightstand. He encouraged me to visit you. He never once tried to compete with you or make me choose sides." Sarah's perfect composure cracked further, a glimmer of genuine emotion breaking through her polished exterior. Perhaps she was remembering the woman she'd been 15 years ago, the choices she'd made, the consequences that had rippled through all our lives. "And now," Michael went on, "you bring James here to my graduation, trying to replace the father. Who did all that? Trying to pretend that money and connections mean more than years of actual parenting." He turned to James, his expression firm but not unkind. "You seem like a decent person. Maybe you even meant well. But you can't buy your way into being my father." The expensive watch caught the sunlight as Michael stepped forward, holding it out to James. "I appreciate the gifts, the opportunities, the intentions, but I don't need them. What I need, what I've always had, is a father who understands that real success isn't measured by the size of your bank account or the connections you have." James hesitated before taking the watch, his confident demeanor completely gone now. The acceptance letterbox in his pocket seemed to weigh him down, his shoulders slumping slightly as the reality of the situation sank in. I stood quietly, watching my son handle this moment with a maturity that made my heart swell with pride. The medals on my chest felt lighter somehow, their weight balanced by the knowledge that the values they represented, honor, duty, integrity, had truly been passed on to the next generation. Principal Anderson cleared his throat once again, trying to guide the ceremony back to its intended purpose. "If we could all take our seats," he began, but Michael had one final thing to say. "Before we continue," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the stadium, "I want to make something else clear." He turned to face me directly. "Dad, I'm going to Wisconsin, just like we planned, not because it's easier or safer, but because it's the right choice for me, and because—" He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "Because I want to become the kind of man you taught me to be." The morning sun seemed to brighten at his words, casting long shadows across the football field where I had watched him play countless games. In those shadows, I could see the echoes of all our shared moments. The homework sessions at the kitchen table, the fishing trips to Lake Mendota, the late-night talks about life and values and what it means to be a good man. Sarah and James stood frozen, their carefully orchestrated plan completely unraveled by the simple power of truth and authentic relationships. The crowd remained silent, witnesses to a moment that transcended the usual pomp and circumstance of graduation ceremonies. The stadium began to buzz with whispered conversations as Principal Anderson finally managed to guide everyone back to their seats. Sarah and James retreated to their spots, their perfect facade crumbling under the weight of public rejection. But this was far from over. I could see it in Sarah's rigid posture, in the way she gripped her designer purse, in the sharp glances she kept throwing toward the stage. As I took my place among the other parents waiting to see their children graduate, the woman next to me, the one whose daughter was heading to UCLA, leaned over. "You should be proud," she whispered. "Not just of your son's decision, but of how you raised him. It's not easy being a single dad." Her words hit home in a way I hadn't expected, pride mixed with a deeper emotion, validation perhaps. For 15 years I'd second-guessed myself, wondered if I was doing enough, being enough. Sarah's constant implications that our small-town life was somehow lacking had left their mark, even if I rarely admitted it. The ceremony proceeded, but there was an electric undercurrent running through the crowd. Phones were still out, though now more discreetly. I could almost see the social media posts spreading. Son chooses blue-collar dad over rich stepdad at graduation. The thought made me uncomfortable, our private family drama becoming public entertainment. Michael sat tall among his classmates, no longer slumped with the weight of his secret. Every now and then he would glance back at me, a small smile playing at his lips. It was the same smile I remembered from when he was 6, proudly showing me a drawing he'd made of us fishing together. Some things, it seemed, never changed. Principal Anderson began calling names, each graduate walking across the stage to receive their diploma. I watched as familiar faces, kids I'd seen grow up alongside Michael, children I'd coached in little, league or helped with school projects, took their turns in the spotlight. Each one represented a piece of the community that had helped shape my son. Jennifer Adams, Anderson called, and the UCLA-bound girl walked across the stage. Her mother beside me wiped away tears, her pride palpable. This was what graduation should be about: celebration, achievement, hope for the future, not family drama and attempted social climbing. As the names continued, I noticed something interesting happening in the crowd. Parents were shifting in their seats, forming subtle alliances. Those who understood the value of hard work, of being present, of building character rather than connections, seemed to gravitate toward my section. Meanwhile, the space around Sarah and James grew increasingly isolated, their designer clothes and affluent appearance now marking them as somehow out of touch with the real values being celebrated today. "Richard Martinez," Anderson announced, and I watched Rick's son cross the stage. Rick, my foreman at the construction company, had taught Michael about engines during summer breaks, showing him that knowledge and skill weren't confined to university classrooms. His son was heading to technical school, a choice that Sarah would have dismissed, but that represented real opportunity and honest work. The names continued, each one bringing us closer to Michael's moment. I could see Sarah shifting restlessly, in her seat, probably calculating how to salvage her carefully constructed plans. James sat beside her, his corporate polish now seeming as artificial as the relationship he'd tried to force with my son. "Lauren Phillips," Anderson called, and I remembered the countless times Lauren and Michael had studied together at our kitchen table, sharing my homemade spaghetti while they worked through calculus problems. Simple moments, nothing fancy or prestigious about them, but real, authentic. As more names were called, I found myself reflecting on all the moments that had led us here. The night Michael hit his first home run, and how we'd celebrated with ice cream at the local diner. The time he failed his first algebra test, and how we'd worked together every evening until he understood the concepts. The camping trips where we'd talked about life, values, and what it means to be a man of integrity. These weren't the kind of experiences you could buy with a wealthy stepfather's credit card or access through corporate connections. They were the building blocks of character, the moments that shaped not just success, but significance. I glanced at my medals again, thinking about what they represented, not just military service, but commitment, sacrifice, integrity. The same values I'd tried to instill in Michael. Looking at him now, sitting straight and proud among his classmates, I knew those lessons had taken root. The ceremony continued, but there was a new energy in the stadium. Parents were sharing knowing looks, subtle nods of understanding. This wasn't just about one family's drama anymore. It had become a statement about values, about what really matters in raising children, about the true meaning of success. "We're getting close to the M's," the UCLA mom whispered, squeezing my arm supportively. "Are you ready?" Ready. I'd been ready for this moment since I first held Michael in my arms, since I made the decision 15 years ago to be the father he needed, not just the father convenience allowed. Every baseball game, every homework session, every heart-to-heart talk had been preparing us for this milestone. The air seemed to thicken with anticipation as Anderson worked his way through the L's. Sarah's attempts to rewrite our history, to replace years of genuine fatherhood with a corporate substitute, had failed. But more importantly, Michael had found his voice, had stood up for what he believed in, had chosen substance over style. "Kevin Matthews," Anderson called, and my heart began to race. Soon it would be Michael's turn to cross that stage, not as the son of a Chicago power couple, not as the protege of a corporate executive, but as himself, the boy I'd raised to become a man of character, the son who understood that true worth isn't measured by bank accounts or business connections. "Michael Reynolds," Principal Anderson's voice rang out across the stadium, and time seemed to slow down. The morning sun caught the medals on my chest as I rose from my seat, each step toward the stage feeling both heavier and lighter than the last. This was our moment. Not just mine, not just Michael's, but a testament to 15 years of choosing what was right over what was easy. Sarah and James remained seated, their earlier bravado replaced by a tense silence. The acceptance letter to the University of Chicago's business program still sat in James's pocket. Now nothing more than an expensive piece of paper that couldn't buy what mattered most: genuine love, respect, and trust. As Michael stood to make his way to the stage, something unexpected happened. His fellow graduates, kids who had grown up alongside him in our small town, who had seen our story unfold over the years, began to stand. One by one, then in waves, they rose to their feet. Not with the formal solemnity of a planned ceremony, but with the spontaneous support of a community that recognized and valued authenticity. "Dad," Michael called out as we both approached the stage from different directions. His voice carried clearly through the stadium's sound system, still picking up every word. "Would you help me with something?" I nodded, climbing the steps as Principal Anderson watched with a mixture of concern and understanding. Michael reached beneath his graduation gown and pulled out a small box, one that looked surprisingly similar to the one James had been holding earlier. "I've been wanting to give you this," Michael said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I saved up for it from my part-time job at Rick's construction site." He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant watch. Not the expensive designer, a brand James had given him, but something chosen with thought and earned through honest work. "It's engraved," he said, turning it over. The stadium's cameras zoomed in, projecting the image onto the large screens that had been set up for the ceremony. The inscription read, "To Dad, who taught me that true success is measured by who you are, not what you own. Love, Michael." The crowd's collective intake of breath was audible. This wasn't just a gift. It was a declaration, a public acknowledgement of values that went deeper than designer labels and corporate connections. I earned this myself, Michael continued, his voice growing stronger. Every hour of work, every early morning, every lesson you taught me about the dignity of honest labor. It all went into this moment. He held out the watch to me, his eyes clear and proud. Just like you earned those medals, Dad. Not by taking shortcuts or buying influence, but by showing up, doing what's right, and never compromising your integrity. My hands trembled slightly as I took the watch, its weight somehow more significant than any medal I'd ever received. This wasn't just a timepiece, it was proof that everything I'd tried to teach Michael had taken root and flourished. Principal Anderson stepped forward, Michael's diploma in hand. But my son wasn't finished. He turned to face the crowd, his voice carrying across the hushed stadium. Everyone here today is celebrating achievement, marking a transition from one phase of life to another. But what makes an achievement real isn't just the paper we receive, it's the character we develop along the way. He glanced toward where Sarah and James sat, his expression not angry, but resolute. Some people think success is about climbing social ladders, about trading up for better connections or more prestigious opportunities. But my dad, my real dad, taught me that true success is about building something that lasts. Something built on integrity, hard work, and genuine relationships. The medals on my chest caught the sunlight as I stood straighter, pride swelling in my heart. This was my son, speaking not just with his voice, but with his character, demonstrating the values I'd spent 15 years trying to instill. So yes, Michael continued, I'm going to the University of Wisconsin, not because it's an easier path, but because it's the right path for me. I'm going to study engineering, just like I always planned, because I want to build things that last, just like my dad taught me. Principal Anderson chose this moment to step forward again, offering Michael his diploma. But instead of simply taking it and moving on, Michael turned to me. Dad, would you do the honors? You're the one who helped me earn this. The stadium erupted in applause as I took the diploma from Principal Anderson and handed it to my son. This wasn't just a ceremonial passing of paper. It was a testament to years of guidance, support, and unwavering love. Sarah's voice cut through the applause, sharp and insistent. Michael, you're making a mistake. The opportunities you're giving up. No, Mom, Michael interrupted, his voice firm but kind. The only mistake would be pretending to be someone I'm not. Dad taught me that success without integrity isn't success at all. It's just an expensive illusion. The watch felt warm in my hands as I strapped it to my wrist, replacing the basic timepiece I'd worn for years. Like the medals on my chest, this wasn't just an accessory. It was a symbol of values passed down, of lessons learned, of a legacy. Continued. Congratulations, graduate, I said, pulling Michael into a hug that said everything words couldn't. In that embrace was 15 years of early mornings, late nights, tough lessons, and unconditional love. 15 years of choosing to be present, of showing up when it would have been easier to give up. The rest of the graduation ceremony continued, but everything felt different now. As Michael and I left the stage, the applause followed us. Not the polite ceremonial kind, but something deeper, more genuine. It was the sound of a community recognizing and celebrating authentic values over artificial success. I returned to my seat, the new watch on my wrist, feeling like both a gift and a responsibility. The UCLA mom reached over and squeezed my arm. Again, that's what real parenting looks like, she whispered, wiping away tears. Your son just taught everyone here something important. But not everyone shared in the celebration. Sarah and James had moved to the back of the stadium, their perfect image now thoroughly shattered. I could see Sarah on her phone, gesturing animatedly, while James stood beside her, his corporate confidence replaced by obvious discomfort. Even from a distance, I could tell they were doing damage control as more names were called and more graduates. And across the stage, Phones throughout the stadium lit up with notifications. Our private family drama had gone public in a way I hadn't anticipated. Videos of Michael's speech, his gift, and his choice were already spreading across social media platforms. Some parents around me were reading comments aloud in hushed voices. Single dad's son chooses integrity over wealth at graduation. You won't believe what happens next. Watch this graduate's powerful message about real success. Emotional moment as son honors hard-working father over wealthy stepfather. The say headlines made me uncomfortable. This wasn't meant to be entertainment or a viral moment. It was about a father and son, about values and choices that ran deeper than any social media post could capture. Rick, my foreman, made his way over during a brief pause in the ceremony. "Marcus," he said, his voice gruff with emotion, "that boy of yours just made every working parent here proud. You did good, brother. Real good." I touched the watch on my wrist, thinking about Michael working those early morning shifts at the construction site, never complaining, learning the value of earned success rather than handed privilege. "He did this himself, Rick. All I did was show him the way." "That's what real fathers do," Rick replied, clapping me on the shoulder. "They don't buy the way, they show it." The ceremony was winding down when I noticed something happening in the graduate seating area. Students were passing something among themselves, each adding to it before passing it on. Even from a distance, I could see it was a card of some kind. Principal Anderson was closing the ceremony when a student representative approached him, whispering something. He nodded, then spoke into the microphone. "Before we conclude, the graduating class has something they'd like to share." The class president, Emma Chen, stood up holding what I now could see was a large graduation card. "Mr. Reynolds," she began, her voice clear and confident, "we've all known Michael since elementary school. We've seen how you raised him, how you supported him, how you taught him what really matters in life." She held up the card. "Every graduate here has signed this, adding their own story about times you helped them too. The baseball games you coached, the homework help you gave, the rides home when we needed them, the advice you shared. You didn't just raise Michael, you helped raise all of us." The stadium grew quiet as Emma continued. "We all have parents who love us, who want the best for us. But today, Michael reminded us that the best isn't about money or status or connections. It's about character. It's about integrity. It's about being someone others can count on." I could feel tears threatening as Emma walked toward me, the massive card in her hands. "So this is from all of us, because today isn't just about celebrating graduation. It's about celebrating the kind of parent who shows us how to be better people, not just more successful ones." As I took the card, I could see Sarah and James slipping out of the stadium, their grand plans for rewriting our family story completely undone. But their departure barely registered. I was too focused on the messages filling the card in my hands. "Thank you for teaching Michael to stand up for what's right. He taught me to do the same. Your spaghetti dinners during study sessions got me through calculus. The time you helped fix my car instead of calling a tow truck showed me what community means. Michael's lucky to have you as a dad, and we're all lucky to have you as part of our community." The messages went on and on, each one a testament to the truth that real influence isn't bought with money or status. It's earned through consistent acts of kindness, through showing up, through living your values even when no one is watching. The watch on my wrist caught the sunlight, its simple face reflecting the kind of success I'd always tried to teach Michael about. Success built on honest work, genuine relationships, and unwavering integrity. Each tick seemed to whisper the truth that had played out in front of everyone today. Character matters more than connections, integrity outweighs influence, and real fatherhood can't be bought or replaced. After the ceremony, as families gathered on the football field for photos and celebrations, the full weight of what had happened began to sink in. The videos had gone viral, turning our private family moment into public entertainment. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications, messages and calls from news outlets wanting to tell our story. I stood at the edge of the field, watching as Michael posed for pictures with his friends. He seemed lighter now, free from the burden of the secret he'd been carrying, but I couldn't shake a creeping sense of unease. Sarah and James might have left the stadium, but I knew this wasn't over. People like them didn't accept public rejection without consequences. As if summoned by my thoughts, my phone lit up with Sarah's name. I stepped away from the crowd to answer it. Her voice was cold, controlled, the tone I remembered from our worst arguments during the divorce. "Are you happy now, Marcus?" she asked, each word sharp as ice. "You've completely ruined everything we planned for Michael's future. James was going to set him up with internships, connections, opportunities. You couldn't possibly provide. But no, you had to play the noble working-class hero." I watched Michael laughing with his friends, the sun glinting off his graduation gown. "I didn't plan any of this, Sarah. Michael made his own choice." "Choice?" she scoffed. "You've been poisoning him against success since the day I left, filling his head with outdated ideas about honest work and integrity. Do you have any idea what you've cost him? The doors that would have opened with James's influence?" Her words hit harder than I expected, touching old insecurities I thought I'd buried years ago. "Success isn't just about doors opening, Sarah. It's about being worthy of walking through them. Oh, spare me the blue-collar philosophy," she snapped. "This isn't about worthiness. It's about reality. You've sentenced our son to mediocrity because you couldn't handle him choosing a better path than yours." I felt my grip tightening on the phone. "A better path? You mean teaching him that loyalty can be bought? That relationships are just transactions? That fathers are replaceable if the price is right?" "Don't be dramatic, Marcus. James could have given him everything you couldn't. A future in business, connections in Chicago's top circles, a life beyond that small-town mentality you're so proud of. But now—" She paused, her voice turning colder. "Now you'll see what your precious integrity is really worth." The threat in her tone was unmistakable. "What does that mean, Sarah?" "It means you've made your choice, and so has Michael. But choices have consequences. James was going to fund his entire education, tuition, housing, expenses. That offer is off the table now. Let's see how far your construction salary goes in covering college costs." My stomach twisted. The Wisconsin scholarship would cover tuition, but there were still many expenses to consider. Books, housing, meal plans, costs I'd been counting on Sarah's support to help cover. "You'd punish Michael to get back at me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "No, Marcus, you punished Michael by encouraging this public spectacle. We're just accepting his choice to reject our help, all of our help." The call ended, leaving me standing alone at the edge of the celebration. The watch Michael had given me felt heavier now, each tick a reminder of the challenges ahead. I'd always taught him that doing the right thing wasn't always doing the easy thing, but this felt different. Had I inadvertently pushed him into a decision that would limit his future? Rick found me still standing there, staring at my phone. One look at my face, and he knew something was wrong. "Marcus, you okay, brother?" I tried to force a smile, but couldn't quite manage it. "Sarah called. They're pulling all financial support for college, everything My voice caught. "I don't know if I can cover it all on my own." Rick was quiet for a moment, then spoke with the practical wisdom I'd always appreciated about him. "You remember that summer when the foundation was bad on the Henderson project? Everyone said to tear it down, start over, would have been easier, quicker. But you said, you don't scrap something solid just because the path forward is hard." I finished remembering that challenging project. "Exactly. And what happened? We found a way, worked longer hours, brought in specialists when needed, made it work." Rick nodded. And that building's still standing solid as ever, because it was built right, from the ground up. He gestured toward Michael. Just like him. I followed his gaze. Michael was now helping some of his classmates take photos with their families, making sure everyone was included, just like I'd taught him. Success means nothing if you leave others behind. The money will be tight, Rick continued, but he's got something worth more than James's connections or Sarah's cash. He's got character, and he's got a community that recognizes that. As if to prove his point, several parents approached us. They'd overheard Sarah's threat. Word traveled fast in small towns, and they weren't having it. Marcus, Mrs. Chen, Emma's mother, spoke first. Michael tutored Emma in physics all year, refused to take payment, said it was just the right thing to do. That's the kind of person he is, the kind of person you raised him to be. We've been talking, and we want help. Mrs. Chen's words hung in the air, filled with possibility. Other parents began gathering around us, each with their own story about Michael, about our family, about the impact we'd had on the community without even realizing it. Remember when Michael organized that study group for the SATs? Mr. Patterson, the local librarian, stepped forward. He didn't just help the top students, he made sure everyone who wanted to improve had a chance. That's the kind of leadership money can't buy. The UCLA mom joined in, her daughter Jennifer beside her. And when Jennifer's car broke down during finals week last semester, Michael didn't just give her a ride. He taught her basic car maintenance so she'd know what to do next time. Said his dad taught him that knowledge only matters if you share. Each story felt like a small light, pushing back against the darkness of Sarah's threats. But it was Rick who stepped forward with something more concrete. Marcus, he said, his voice carrying the weight of a decision already made. I've been meaning to talk to you about something. The company's expanding. We've got that new contract for the community center project, and I need someone to oversee. It's someone who understands both the technical side and the human side. The pay increase would be significant. I stared at him, understanding slowly dawning. Rick, you don't have to. This isn't charity. He cut me off firmly. This is business. You're the best project manager I've got, and this promotion is long overdue. The fact that it helps with Michael's college expenses is just good timing. Before I could respond, Mrs. Jen spoke up again. And the tutoring center where I work needs physics and math tutors for the summer program. Michael's already proven he's excellent at teaching others. It's paid work, and it would look good on his resume. Jennifer stepped forward, her graduation gown swishing. Plus, my mom knows someone in the housing department at Wisconsin. There might be an opportunity for a resident advisor position after a freshman year. Free room and board in exchange for helping other students. One by one, people stepped forward with ideas, suggestions, and genuine offers of help. Not handouts or charity, but opportunities earned through years of building genuine relationships and demonstrating real character. Dad! Michael's voice cut through the crowd. He'd made his way over, perhaps drawn by the gathering of people. His face showed concern as he took in my expression. What's going on? I looked at my son, seeing not just the graduate in his gown, but the man he'd become. Your mother called, I said honestly. We'd never hidden hard truths from each other. She and James are withdrawing their financial support for college. I expected him to look worried, but instead he smiled. I know, he said quietly. She texted me right after they left the ceremony, said I'd made my choice, and now I had to live with it. Michael, I'm so sorry. If I'd known... Known what, Dad? He interrupted. Known that they'd try to use money, to control me, that they'd prove exactly why I made the right choice. He touched the watch on my wrist. Everything you've taught me about integrity, about earning your way, about building real relationships instead of buying influence. They just proved how right you were. The crowd around us had grown quiet, listening to this father-son moment. Michael continued, his voice stronger now. You want to know something funny? I've already been planning for this. Remember all those extra shifts I took at the construction site? The ones you thought were just about earning money for your watch? He pulled an envelope from under his graduation gown. I've been saving. It's not much, but it's a start. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a bank statement showing several $1,000s in savings. Money earned through hard work, early mornings and dedication. You taught me to always have a backup plan, Michael explained. To never depend on promises that seemed too good to be true. So when Mom and James started talking about paying for everything, about making life easy, he shrugged. I kept saving anyway, because you taught me that anything worth having is worth working for. Mrs. Chen wiped tears from her eyes. You see, Marcus, the lessons you taught Michael, they're worth more than any trust fund or corporate connection. Rick cleared his throat. And you're not in this alone. This community, we look after our own. Not with handouts, but with opportunities. With chances to earn your way and prove your worth. Michael looked around at the gathering of people. Teachers, parents, friends, neighbors. Each one representing a connection built not through money or influence, but through genuine interactions and shared values. Mom and James thought they could buy me a better future, he said, his voice carrying clearly. But they don't understand. The future I want, the person I want to be, that's not for sale. It's earned every day through the choices we make and the values we live. Bye. The watch on my wrist caught the afternoon sun, its simple face reflecting the truth of Michael's words. Success built on integrity might take longer, might require more effort, but it creates a foundation that no amount of money can shake. As the graduation crowd began to thin, something remarkable started happening. People weren't just offering support, they were taking action. Mr. Patterson, the librarian, was already on his phone, calling contacts at Wisconsin about work-study programs. Jennifer's mother was drafting an email to her housing department. Connection. Rick had pulled out his laptop and was showing me the details of the community center project. The salary increase would start immediately, Rick explained, pointing to figures on the screen. Plus, there's a bonus structure tied to project milestones. And, he grinned, since you've technically been doing project manager work for the past year anyway, there's some back pay we need to discuss. Michael sat beside me, still in his graduation gown, taking everything in. His face showed a mix of emotions, gratitude, determination, and something else that looked a lot like pride. Not the shallow pride that came from expensive gifts or status symbols, but the deep satisfaction of seeing genuine values validated. Dad, he said suddenly, remember that conversation we had last year? About how success isn't just about reaching the top, but about how you climb. I nodded, recalling that late-night talk after he'd seen some of his friends cheating on a difficult exam. They'd all gotten A's, while Michael's honest effort had earned him a B+. You told me that shortcuts might get you there faster, but they don't make you stronger, he continued. That the struggle itself builds something valuable. He gestured at the people around us, all working to help create real opportunities. This is what you meant, isn't it? Building success on relationships and respect instead of just money and influence. Before I could respond, Mrs. Chen interrupted. With excitement, Marcus Michael, the tutoring center board just approved my emergency proposal. We want to offer Michael a full-time position for the summer, with flexible hours once college starts. The pay is competitive, and more importantly, it's experience that will look excellent on his engineering applications. Michael's eyes lit up. Engineering applications? Mrs. Chen smiled. Several of our students are children of engineers at the local firms, parents who've seen your physics and math tutorials online. She paused, noting our confused expressions. You didn't know? Some of your study group sessions were recorded and shared. They've gone viral in our local STEM community. Parents are impressed by your ability to explain complex concepts in simple terms. I watched my son process this information, seeing him realized that his genuine efforts to help others had created opportunities he never anticipated. This was how real networking worked, not through bought connections, but through demonstrated value and authentic relationships. Rick chimed in, and speaking of engineering, the community center project needs a junior engineering assistant, someone to learn while doing, to understand both the theoretical and practical sides. He looked at Michael meaningfully. It would be part-time work around your tutoring schedule, and the experience would be invaluable for your degree. The contrast with James's offered connections couldn't have been clearer. These weren't handed-down opportunities based on social status or financial influence. These were chances to learn, to grow, to prove yourself through actual work and genuine contribution. But that's not all, Jennifer's mother added, hanging up from her phone call. The housing department is very interested in your community service background, Michael. The resident advisor position typically only goes to upperclassmen, but they're willing to consider you for the sophomore year if you maintain a strong academic record as a freshman. That would cover room and board completely. Michael sat straighter, his expression becoming more focused with each possibility presented. I recognized that look. It was the same one he'd worn when tackling particularly challenging problems, whether in mathematics or life. "Okay," he said, pulling out his phone and opening a notes app. "Let me break this down." He began typing rapidly. Summer, full-time tutoring plus part-time engineering assistant work first year, work-study program plus maintain GPA for RA position, second year, resident advisor position, plus continue part-time engineering. Work plus, Dad's promotion provides additional family support. He looked up at me, his eyes clear and determined. "This isn't just possible, Dad. This is better than James's offer. Instead of being handed things, I'll be learning, growing, proving myself, building a real resume with actual experience." The watch on my wrist ticked steadily, marking time as we watched my son transform what could have been a setback into an opportunity for genuine growth. This was the kind of problem-solving I'd always tried to teach him, not avoiding challenges, but facing them head-on with creativity and determination. "There's something else to consider," Rick added, his voice thoughtful. "Every connection you make through these opportunities, they're real, based on your work, your character, your actual abilities, not just someone doing a favor for James's stepson." The truth of those words settled over our small gathering. Sarah and James had offered a seemingly easier path, but it would have been built on artificial foundations. What was emerging now was something far more valuable, a network of opportunities, earned through merit and maintained through genuine relationships. Mrs. Chen summed it up perfectly. "Some people inherit their networks, Michael, others buy them. But the strongest networks are built through trust, respect, and demonstrated capability. You're not just earning money for college, you're building something that will serve you far beyond graduation." Just as we were finalizing the details of Michael's summer plans, my phone buzzed with an incoming email. The sender's address made my stomach tighten. It was from James's corporate legal team. Everyone gathered around me fell silent as I opened. The message, its formal tone, a stark contrast to the warm community support we'd been experiencing. "What is it, Dad?" Michael asked, noticing my expression change as I read. I took a deep breath before responding. "James's lawyers are claiming that since he and your mother had already made verbal commitments regarding your education, and since these commitments influenced your college choice process, they might have grounds for—" I paused, the legal terminology making my head spin. "Something called promissory estoppel." Rick immediately pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my sister. She's a lawyer in Madison. This kind of corporate intimidation is exactly what she fights against." But Michael's reaction surprised everyone. Instead of showing concern, he started laughing. Actually laughing. "Are they serious?" he asked, pulling out his own phone. "They might want to check their facts first." He pulled up his email and showed me a series of messages dated months ago. Correspondence between him and the University of Wisconsin's engineering department. "I never officially accepted the University of Chicago offer," he explained. "I never even completed their enrollment process. Mom and James just assumed I would because it fit their narrative." Mrs. Chen, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "And correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't promissory estoppel require that you actually relied on their promise to your detriment? If you never changed your plans based on their offer—" "Exactly," Michael nodded. "Wisconsin was always my first choice. The scholarship offer came before James ever made his promises. I kept all the documentation because—" He glanced at me with a small smile. "Someone taught me to always keep good records." The memory of teaching Michael about maintaining proper documentation, a lesson learned from my construction work, filled me with unexpected pride. These small, practical lessons had prepared him for moments I never could have anticipated. Just then, Jennifer's mother, who had stepped away to make some calls, returned with more news. "The housing department at Wisconsin is very interested in your situation, Michael. Apparently your viral graduation moment has reached their staff. They're offering you a position in their Leadership Through Service program. It's competitive, but they're willing to fast-track your application." "What does that mean exactly?" I asked. "It means," she explained, "that instead of waiting until sophomore year for the RA position, they'll put Michael through their leadership training program during his freshman year. He'll have a reduced housing rate while training, then full housing coverage once he completes the program. They're calling it an investment in student leadership development." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. James and Sarah had tried to buy Michael's future with promises of connections and luxury, but his own actions, his character, his leadership, his genuine impact on others were creating real opportunities. Rick's sister, Diana, arrived. 20 minutes later, her business suit slightly rumpled from rushing over. She reviewed James's legal threat on my phone, then looked at Michael's documentation of his college decision process. "This is a textbook case of corporate intimidation," she declared. "They're hoping the threat of legal action will pressure you back into their preferred path. But they have no case." She started typing on her laptop. "I'm drafting a response that will shut this down immediately." As Diana worked, more messages started coming in, this time from local news outlets. The graduation video had gone viral beyond our small town, and people wanted to hear our story. But it wasn't just about the drama. They were interested in the deeper message about values, about different definitions of success, about choosing integrity over influence. "You don't have to respond to any of these," I told Michael, showing him the interview requests. "This isn't about creating a spectacle." But Michael was already shaking his head. "No, Dad, I think we should talk to them. Not to shame Mom or James, but to share what we've learned. About how real success isn't bought or inherited, it's built. About how genuine relationships and honest work create opportunities that mean more than any handed-down privilege." Rick's sister looked up from her laptop. "He's right, Marcus. The best defense against their legal threats and social pressure is transparency. Let people see the truth, not just about today's events, but about the values that led to these choices." The watch on my wrist caught the late afternoon sun, reminding me of everything this day had revealed. Michael hadn't just stood up to pressure. He demonstrated the kind of leadership that came from genuine character rather than purchased influence. Mrs. Chen added another perspective. "And think about other families facing similar pressures. Your story could show them that there's another way. That success built on integrity might take more effort, but it creates something lasting. As if to prove her point, my phone buzzed with another notification. This time, it was from the local Contractors Association. They wanted to feature our story in their newsletter. Not just the graduation drama, but the larger message about building success through honest work and real relationships. "You see," Michael said, gesturing at my phone, "every attempt they make to pressure us just proves why their path wasn't right. They offer connections. We'll build real relationships. They threatened legal action. We'll demonstrate transparency and integrity. They try to buy influence. We'll earn respect." The sun was setting on what had become one of the most transformative days of our lives when something unexpected happened. A sleek black car pulled into the now empty school parking lot, and out stepped James's father, Robert Wilson, the man whose connections had built the corporate empire James was so proud of. Unlike his son's flashy style, Robert carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had actually built something from the ground up. He walked toward our small group, his expression thoughtful rather than confrontational. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, extending his hand to me. "I believe we need to talk." The group around us tensed, but Robert raised his hand in a peaceful gesture. "I'm not here to add to the drama. In fact, I'm here to end it." He turned to Michael. "Young man, I've watched the video of your speech. More importantly, I've spent the last few hours looking into your academic record and character references." Michael stood straighter, meeting Robert's gaze with the quiet confidence I'd always tried to instill in him. "Sir, do you know how I built my company?" Robert asked, though it seemed like a rhetorical question. "Not through inherited wealth or bought influence, but by understanding the value of genuine character and earned respect." He glanced at James's legal threat still displayed on my phone. "My son seems to have forgotten that lesson." The revelation hung in the air. Here was the source of James's supposed influence, directly contradicting the very approach his son had tried to use. "The legal threats will stop," Robert continued. "In fact," he pulled out his own phone and made a quick call. "Cancel the letters, all of them, and draft an apology." He ended the call and turned back to us. "But that's not why I'm here." Mrs. Chen and Rick exchanged glances, while Diana, Rick's sister, watched with professional interest. Robert Wilson's reputation in the legal community was legendary, but not for the reasons most people thought. "Michael," Robert addressed my son directly, "your speech today reminded me of something crucial. Success isn't about who you know or what advantages you're given. It's about who you are and what you build." He pulled out a business card, but instead of offering it, he placed it on a nearby bench. "If you're interested, my company has a genuine internship program. Not the kind bought with connections, but one earned through merit. The kind where you start at the bottom and prove yourself." Michael looked at the card but didn't take it. "With all due respect, sir, why would you offer this after everything that's happened?" Robert smiled, and for a moment I saw the man who had built his company from nothing. "Because you did something today that most people never manage. You chose integrity over convenience, hard work over handed privilege. That's exactly the kind of character I look for." He turned to me next. "Mr. Reynolds, you've taught your son something my own son seems to have forgotten. Real success leaves a legacy of respect, not just a trail of transactions." The watch on my wrist felt lighter somehow, its steady ticking a reminder that time reveals truth. Robert's presence here, contradicting his own son's actions, proved what we'd known all along. Genuine character speaks louder than bought influence. "There's something else you should know," Robert added. "The University of Chicago's business program that James was so proud of? I built that program's endowment. And I can tell you with certainty, we look for students who earn their way in, not those who buy their access." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. James had tried to use his father's influence to buy Michael's future, never understanding that his father's success was built on the very values Michael had demonstrated today. Diana spoke up, her legal mind catching something. The program's endowment, does it have specific criteria for admission? Robert nodded, understanding her implication. Merit-based. Explicitly so. Which means James's attempt to guarantee admission through personal influence would have violated the program's own principles. He looked at Michael with newfound respect. You didn't just choose integrity today. You avoided a compromise you didn't even know existed. Michael absorbed this information, then did something that made me incredibly proud. He picked up Robert's business card and handed it back to him. I appreciate the offer, sir, but I've already made commitments for my education and career path. Changing those now, even for a better opportunity, would go against everything I stood for today. Instead of being offended, Robert's smile widened. And that, he said, pocketing the card, just proved you deserve it. He pulled out his phone. Again. Let me make another call. The engineering firms contracted for my company's projects often need fresh perspectives. Firms that value merit over connections. As Robert made his call, I watched my son's face. There was no eager anticipation of handed-down opportunity, just the quiet confidence of someone who knew his path forward would be earned, not given. Mrs. Chen summed it up perfectly. Sometimes standing firm in your values doesn't just protect your integrity, it reveals who truly shares those values. The sun had almost set completely now, casting long shadows across the empty graduation venue. In those shadows, I could see the outline of the man Michael was becoming, someone who understood that true success casts a longer shadow than momentary advantage. Robert Wilson's revelation about James and the University of Chicago program had barely settled when Sarah suddenly appeared at the edge of the parking lot. Her perfect composure was gone, replaced by barely contained fury as she stormed toward us, her heels clicking aggressively against the pavement. "Dad!" She stopped short, staring at Robert in disbelief. "What are you doing here?" Robert turned to face his son's girlfriend, his expression calm but firm. "Cleaning up a mess that never should have happened, Sarah. James's attempts to buy influence, your manipulation of Michael's future. It stops now." Sarah's face flushed red. "You don't understand. We were trying to give Michael opportunities. A chance at a better life than—" She gestured dismissively in my direction, but Robert cut her off. "Better." His voice carried the weight of decades of real business experience, like teaching him that relationships are transactions, that integrity is negotiable, that fathers can be bought and replaced if the price is right. I watched Sarah flinch at these words, perhaps hearing them differently when they came from someone she considered her social equal. Michael stood beside me, his graduation gown now draped over his arm, watching his mother's carefully constructed world continue to unravel. "The company James is so proud of representing," Robert continued. "I built it from nothing. No inherited wealth, no bought connections, just hard work, integrity, and genuine relationships." He glanced at Michael. "The same values your ex-husband taught your son, values you've spent years trying to undermine." Sarah's composure cracked further. "We were protecting him, Marcus's small-town mindset, his outdated ideas about honest work and building from the ground up. That's not how the real world works." "No?" Robert raised an eyebrow. "Then explain how I built a Fortune 500 company using exactly those principles. Explain why the most successful people in my organization are those who earned their way, not those who bought their access." The parking lot had grown darker, but the remaining sunlight caught the medals on my chest and the watch on my wrist, symbols of earned respect and genuine love. Sarah's gaze flickered between them, perhaps seeing them differently now. "Did you know," Robert continued, his voice carrying across the empty school grounds, "that James's attempt to guarantee Michael's admission would have violated our own endowment criteria? That your son actually protected his integrity by refusing an offer that would have compromised ours. Sarah's face went pale. What are you talking about? The Chicago Business Program's endowment, my endowment, explicitly requires merit-based admission. No exceptions, no bought influence, no backdoor entries. Robert's voice was calm, but carried an edge of steel. James knew this. He knew he was offering something he had no right to promise. The implications of this hit Sarah hard. She staggered slightly, her designer heel catching in a crack in the pavement. Michael instinctively stepped forward to steady her, demonstrating the kind of character that money couldn't buy. "Mom," he said gently, still supporting her elbow, "did you ever wonder why I spent so many weekends working at the construction site? Why I kept tutoring even after you said it was beneath me?" Sarah looked at her son, really looked at him perhaps for the first time in years. "You were saving money?" "I was building something," Michael corrected. "Not just a college fund, but relationships. Real ones, based on mutual respect and actual contribution." He gestured to the people around us, Rick, Mrs. Chen, Diana, the others who had stayed to support us. "These people aren't helping me because of social obligations or business connections. They're helping because we've built genuine trust." Rick stepped forward, his work-worn hands a sharp contrast to Sarah's manicured perfection. "Your son helped my daughter understand calculus when everyone else had given up. Never took a dime for it. Said it was just the right thing to do." He smiled at Michael. "That kind of character? You can't buy that. You can only build it." Mrs. Chen added her voice. "And when Michael organized those study groups, he made sure everyone was included, not just the top students. He understood something many adults never learn, that real leadership isn't about rising above others, it's about lifting them up. With you, Sarah's defenses began to crumble visibly, but we just wanted to give him advantages," Robert finished for her. "But you forgot that the most valuable advantages are the ones you earn." He turned to Michael. "Young man, your father taught you something my own son seems to have forgotten, that a life built on integrity might take longer to construct, but it stands stronger against any storm." The watch on my wrist ticked steadily, marking the moments, as Sarah looked around at the group of people surrounding her son. Not wealthy benefactors or social connections, but real people who had watched Michael grow, who had contributed to his character, who were now standing with him not because of obligation, but because of earned respect. "I didn't—" Sarah's voice cracked. "I never meant to." "To what, Mom?" Michael asked softly. "To teach me that my dad's values were outdated? That honest work was somehow beneath us? That real relationships could be bought and replaced like last season's fashion?" The parking lot lights had come on, casting harsh fluorescent light over all of us. In that unforgiving illumination, the contrast between genuine and artificial. Success had never been clearer. The tension in the parking lot was broken by the arrival of James, who pulled up in his luxury car, clearly expecting to find Sarah alone. His confident stride faltered when he saw his father standing among us. The designer briefcase in his hand, likely containing more legal threats, suddenly seemed like a prop in a play that had lost its audience. "Father?" James's voice carried a note of uncertainty I hadn't heard before. "What are you doing here?" "Watching your entire house of cards collapse, son," Robert replied, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Did you really think you could violate the program's endowment terms without consequences? That you could buy your way into being someone's father?" James straightened his tie, a nervous gesture that betrayed his discomfort. "This isn't what you think. We were trying to provide opportunities." "No," Michael interrupted, his voice firm but calm. "You were trying to buy something that can't be purchased. Trust, respect, fatherhood." He touched the watch on my wrist. "Real relationships aren't built on transactions, James. They're built on trust, on showing up, on being there through the hard times And the good. Sarah moved to stand beside James, but something had changed in her demeanor. The certainty that had driven her actions was cracking, revealing doubts she'd long suppressed. "James," she said quietly, "maybe we should—" "Should what?" James snapped, his polished facade crumbling. "Accept that your ex-husband's small-town values somehow trump everything we could offer? That Michael would choose a construction worker's life over real success?" "Real success," Robert's voice cut through his son's tirade. "Let me tell you about real success, James. When I started this company, I worked on construction sites just like Marcus. I learned that a foundation built on honest work lasts longer than one built on quick profits and bought influence." The parking lot lights cast harsh shadows on James's face as the truth of his father's words hit home. His briefcase, still clutched in his hand, now seemed to weigh him down. "Open it," Michael said suddenly, gesturing to the briefcase. "Show everyone what kind of future you were really offering." James hesitated, but Robert stepped forward. "Yes, son. Show us the legal documents you were planning to use to intimidate a high school graduate and his father. Show us how you plan to force someone to accept your version of success." With trembling hands, James opened the briefcase. Inside were stacks of papers, legal threats, financial proposals, conditions for Michael's support, that read more like a corporate takeover than a family relationship. "You see," Michael said, addressing not just James but everyone present, "this is what they were offering. Not love, not guidance, not real opportunity, just contracts and conditions. A life where everything has a price and every relationship is a transaction." I watched my son stand tall in the harsh fluorescent light, the medals on my chest reflecting what he had become. Someone who understood that true value isn't measured in dollars or social status. "But here's what my dad taught me," Michael continued, his voice growing stronger. "Success isn't just about where you end up, it's about how you get there. It's about being able to look in the mirror and respect the person looking back at you." Rick stepped forward, his work-worn hands, a testament to the honest labor James had dismissed. "You know what I see when I look at Michael? I see someone who earned respect the hard way, not by flashing money or making promises, but by showing up, doing the work, helping others." Mrs. Chen added her voice. "When Michael tutored struggling students, he never asked for payment, never looked down on anyone. He showed the kind of leadership that comes from character, not from a corporate playbook." James looked at his father, perhaps seeing for the first time how far he had strayed from the values that had built their family's success. "Dad, Save it," Robert cut him off. "You've spent years trying to buy influence, to shortcut the very principles that made our company successful. And in doing so, you've proven exactly why Michael made the right choice today." Sarah, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. "All this time, we thought we were offering him a better life, but we were really trying to buy what Marcus had earned: respect, trust, real influence." The watch on my wrist seemed to tick louder in the moment of silence that followed. Each tick a reminder of the time invested in building something real, something that couldn't be bought or replicated with quick fixes and financial promises. "You know what the hardest part of today was?" Michael asked, looking directly at James and Sarah. "Not rejecting your offer, not standing up in front of everyone. The hardest part was watching you think that money and connections could replace years of real fatherhood, genuine guidance, and earned respect." The papers in James's briefcase rustled in the evening breeze, their legal threats and financial promises suddenly seeming hollow and meaningless. In their place stood something stronger, the unshakable foundation of character, integrity, and genuine relationships that Michael had built with his own hands, guided by the values I had taught him. The evening had fully settled over the parking lot, the school's fluorescent lights creating pools of harsh clarity in the growing darkness. James stood frozen, his briefcase of legal threats now hanging limply at his side, while Sarah's perfectly maintained facade had crumbled completely. The silence was broken by an unexpected sound, Robert Wilson's laugh. "You know what's truly ironic about all this," he said, shaking his head. "While you two were trying to buy Michael's future, he was actually building one. Real relationships, earned respect, genuine achievements." He turned to face me. "Marcus, you've done something remarkable here. You've taught your son the very principles that built my company, principles my own son seems to have forgotten." James flinched at his father's words, but before he could respond, Sarah stepped forward. Her designer heels no longer clicked with authority. Instead, she moved almost hesitantly, as if seeing everything through new eyes. "Michael," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." She glanced at me, then back to our son. "When I left Madison all those years ago, I told myself it was about opportunities, about giving you a better life. But watching you today, seeing the man you've become," her voice cracked slightly, "I realize I was running from the very things that actually matter." Michael stood steady, the same quiet strength I'd always tried to teach him evident in his posture. "What things, Mom?" "Real connections, genuine community, the kind of success that's built on character rather than credit cards." She looked around at the group still standing with us. Rick, Mrs. Chen, Diana, and the others who had shown what true support looked like. "I thought I was protecting you from a small-town life, but I was really trying to protect myself from the hard work of building something real." James shifted uncomfortably, his corporate polish seeming increasingly out of place. "Sarah, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do," she cut him off, surprising everyone. "Because our son deserves to hear the truth. We didn't offer him opportunities today. We tried to buy his future, his values, his relationship with his father, and in doing so, we proved exactly why Marcus's guidance was more valuable than our money." The watch on my wrist caught the fluorescent light, its simple face reflecting the authenticity of the moment. Michael touched it gently, a small gesture that spoke volumes about the value of earned gifts over bought influence. "You know what I've learned?" Michael addressed his mother. "Real success isn't about escaping your roots, it's about growing them deeper. Dad taught me that every day, not with lectures or money, but by example." Rick stepped forward, his work-worn hands steady as he spoke. "Sarah, you remember when the town was hit by that big storm last year? Your son was out there with us helping, clear debris, checking on elderly neighbors. Not because anyone was watching, not because it would look good on a college application, but because that's who Marcus raised him to be." Mrs. Chen added her perspective. "And when our tutoring center was about to close due to budget cuts, Michael organized a community fundraiser, got local businesses involved, coordinated volunteer teachers. That's the kind of leadership you can't buy. It has to be built, relationship by relationship." Robert Wilson nodded appreciatively. "That's exactly how I built my company. Not through inherited wealth or bought connections, but by understanding that real success is about creating value for others. It's about building trust that lasts longer than any contract." James finally spoke, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "But the opportunities we could have provided weren't really opportunities at all," Michael finished for him. "They were shortcuts, ways to bypass the hard work of earning respect and building real relationships." He gestured to the briefcase, still hanging limply in James's hand. "Those papers might be legally binding, but they can't create genuine bonds. They can't buy the kind of trust that's built through years of showing up, being present, doing what's right, even when it's hard." Sarah wiped away tears that had smeared her perfect makeup. "I was so focused on climbing the social ladder that I forgot what really matters. Watching you today, standing up for your values, choosing integrity over convenience." She looked at me with new respect. Marcus, you gave our son something I never could have bought him. Character. The evening air had grown cooler, but there was a warmth in the gathering that no amount of money could create. It was the warmth of genuine connections, of truth acknowledged, of values validated. "Mom," Michael said gently, "success isn't about rising above your community. It's about lifting it up with you. Dad taught me that every day, not with words, but with actions, with consistency, with integrity." Robert closed his son's briefcase with a decisive click. "The legal threats end now. The manipulation ends now." He turned to James. "It's time. You remembered how this company was really built, not on buying influence, but on earning trust. The parking lot lights created long shadows as our small group stood in this moment of truth. Each person present represented a different aspect of genuine success. Rick's honest labor, Mrs. Chen's dedication to education, Diana's commitment to justice, Robert's remembrance of humble beginnings, and at the center of it all stood Michael, a young man who had chosen character over convenience, integrity over influence, real relationships over bought connections. A week had passed since the graduation ceremony, and the changes in our lives were both subtle and profound. The viral videos of Michael's stand for integrity had sparked something unexpected. A nationwide conversation about success, values, and what it truly means to build a meaningful life. I sat at our kitchen table early Monday morning. The watch. Michael had given me marking time as I reviewed the plans for the community center project. Rick had been true to his word about the promotion, and the increased responsibility felt right, earned through years of consistent work rather than handed down through connections. Michael came downstairs, dressed for his first day at the tutoring center. No designer clothes or expensive accessories, just clean professional attire that reflected the substance of his character rather than the size of his wallet. "Ready for your first day?" I asked, noting how confident he looked, not with the artificial confidence of social status, but with the real assurance that comes from knowing your own worth. "More than ready," he smiled, checking his backpack. "Mrs. Chen already has a full schedule of students signed up. Apparently, the video of my graduation speech made some parents rethink what kind of guidance their kids really need. The past week had brought changes we hadn't expected. Local businesses, inspired by Michael's stand for integrity, had started reaching out to the high school about creating genuine internship programs, not based on social connections, but on merit and character. Rick's daughter Amy came by to pick up Michael. They were carpooling to save money, a practical decision that would have made Sarah cringe a week ago. But even Sarah had been showing signs of change. "Mom called last night," Michael mentioned as he gathered his things. "She wanted to know if I'd be willing to help start a mentoring program in Chicago, not for privileged kids with connections, but for students who need real guidance about building success the right way." I nodded, remembering my own conversation with Sarah 2 days ago. She had called, her voice lacking its usual polish, to talk about the years we'd lost to her pursuit of status. "I was wrong," she had said simply. "Not just about leaving, but about what I taught Michael about success. Watching him these past few days, seeing how people respond to his character rather than his connections, it's made me question everything." The community's response to Michael's choice had been overwhelming. Local news stations had run features not just about the graduation incident, but about the quiet ways he had been building real influence all along. The study groups, the volunteer work, the consistent choice to lift others up rather than climb over them. Robert Wilson had kept his word about ending the legal threats, but he'd done more than that. He'd established a new scholarship at the University of Wisconsin, specifically for students who demonstrated character and community impact over social connections. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The very wealth James had tried to use as Leverage was now being used to reward the values he had dismissed. "Dad," Michael said, interrupting my thoughts, "do you remember what you told me when I was 10 about the difference between being successful and being significant?" I smiled, recalling that conversation. We had been working on his science fair project, not the fanciest display, but one he had researched and built himself. "Success is about what you achieve for yourself," I quoted. "Significance is about what you help others achieve." "That's what I'm going to focus on at the tutoring center," he said, his eyes bright with purpose. "Not just helping kids pass tests, but helping them understand their own worth isn't determined by their social status or bank accounts." Amy honked from outside, and Michael grabbed his backpack. But before he left, he paused. "You know what's funny? James and Mom thought they were offering me a better future, but they were really just offering a faster path to emptiness. Everything I really need, character, integrity, real relationships, I learned right here." As I watched him leave with Amy, I thought about how much had changed. The viral graduation video had sparked important conversations, but the real story wasn't in the dramatic moments. It was in the daily choices that had led to them. The consistent decision to value character over convenience, integrity over influence, genuine relationships over social status. My phone buzzed with a message from Diana, Rick's sister. "The Contractors Association wanted to feature our story in their national publication, not focusing on the graduation drama, but on the larger message about building success through honest work and real relationships." Another message followed, this one from Robert Wilson. He was establishing a mentoring program at his company, partnering experienced workers with new employees to teach the values that had built his success, the very values he feared his son had forgotten. The watch on my wrist caught the morning. "Son," each tick a reminder that real change, like real success, isn't built in dramatic moments but in consistent daily choices. Michael had chosen his path not just at graduation but in all the small moments leading up to it. Every time he helped a struggling student, every early morning at the construction site, every decision to value substance over status. Looking at the community center plans spread before me, I realized we were building more than just a building. We were creating a space where these values could continue to grow, where success would be measured not by social status, but by community impact, where the next generation could learn that real influence comes from character, not connections. 2 weeks after graduation, I found myself sitting on our back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors no amount of money could buy. The watch Michael had given me marked each moment as I reflected on how much had changed, not just in our lives, but in our entire community. The viral video of Michael's graduation speech had done more than just capture a moment of choosing integrity over influence. It had sparked a movement. Local businesses had started re-evaluating their internship programs, focusing on merit and character rather than connections. Schools were implementing mentorship initiatives that paired students based on genuine abilities rather than social status. Michael came out to join me, carrying 2 cups of coffee, the same simple brew we'd shared during countless late-night study sessions and heart-to-heart talks. He'd just returned from another successful day at the tutoring center, where his approach to teaching had already started showing results. "You know what one of my students said today?" he asked, settling into the chair beside me. "She said she used to think success meant having the most expensive things, the right connections. But after watching what happened at graduation, she realized success is about who you become, not what you own." I smiled, remembering my own journey to that understanding. It's amazing how one moment of standing up for what's right can impact so many people. It wasn't just one moment, though, was it, Dad? Michael turned to face me, his expression thoughtful. It was all the moments leading up to it. Every time you chose to show up, every lesson about integrity, every example of putting character above convenience. The evening breeze carried the scent of Mrs. Chen's garden next door. She had started a community gardening project, inspired by our story, to create more opportunities for genuine connection in our neighborhood. Even Sarah had been affected by the changes. "Mum called again today," Michael mentioned, his voice carrying a new understanding. "She's been doing a lot of thinking. Said watching me choose substance over status made her realize how much she'd lost chasing the wrong kind of success." Sarah's transformation had been perhaps the most unexpected outcome. She'd resigned from her high-pressure corporate law practice, choosing instead to work with a non-profit that provided legal aid to working families. It was a different kind of success, one measured in impact rather than income. "You know what really got to her?" Michael continued. "When Robert Wilson said that true influence can't be bought, only earned, she realized that all those years of climbing the social ladder, she was actually moving further from what really matters." The watch on my wrist caught the last rays of sunlight, its simple face reflecting the truth we'd always known. That real value isn't in the price of things, but in the worth of our character. Rick walked by our house, returning from the community center construction site. He waved, then came up to the porch to join us. "You two should see what's happening at the site," he said, his face bright with purpose. "The whole community's getting involved, people volunteering their time, sharing their skills. It's becoming more than just a building. It's becoming a symbol of what we stand for." He was right. The community center project had evolved beyond its original scope. Local tradespeople were offering apprenticeships, teaching young people the value of skilled work. Business owners were creating genuine mentorship programs, focusing on character development alongside professional skills. "James stopped by the site today," Rick mentioned, causing both Michael and me to look up in surprise. He was different, humbled, said watching his father talk about building success through honest work made him realize how far he'd strayed from those values. The transformation wasn't just in James. His father, Robert Wilson, had used this experience to refocus his company's values, implementing programs that recognized and rewarded character alongside performance. The scholarship he'd established at Wisconsin was already attracting attention for its unique criteria, measuring applicants not by their connections, but by their community impact. "You know what's ironic?" Michael mused, looking at the deepening twilight. "Mom and James thought they were offering me a shortcut to success, but they were really offering a shortcut around everything that makes success meaningful." Mrs. Chen appeared at her fence, carrying a basket of fresh vegetables from her garden. She joined us on the porch, her presence a reminder of how real communities support each other. "I had 3 new students sign up today," she shared, settling into a chair. Not because of fancy marketing or social connections, but because they heard about how Michael approaches tutoring, focusing on building confidence alongside competence. The evening grew darker, but our conversation continued, each of us sharing stories of how the graduation moment had rippled through our lives. Diana, Rick's sister, had started a legal advocacy program for working families. The local high school had implemented a character development curriculum. Even the Chamber of Commerce had revised its business awards to include metrics for community, impact, and ethical leadership. "The funny thing is," Michael reflected, "everyone keeps talking about how I gave up this amazing opportunity with James and Mom. But what I really did was choose a better opportunity, the chance to build something real, something that lasts." The watch ticked steadily on my wrist, marking time as we sat together, a small group of people who understood that true success isn't measured in dollars or social status, but in the lives we touch and the character we build. 1 month after graduation, I stood at the entrance of the nearly completed community center. the morning sun warming the medals on my chest and glinting off the watch Michael had given me. The building represented more than just a construction project now. It had become a symbol of everything we believed in, everything we had fought for. Michael walked up beside me, his work boots dusty from helping at the construction site before, heading to his tutoring sessions. The past month had changed him, not in the way Sarah and James had once hoped, but in a way that mattered more. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew his true worth wasn't measured by his bank account or social connections. "Big day today," he said, looking up at the building. "First mentorship program starts this afternoon." The community center had evolved into something none of us had anticipated. What started as a simple construction project had grown into a hub for real opportunity and genuine growth. Local business owners, inspired by our story, had created apprenticeship programs. Skilled workers offered training. Even Sarah had surprised everyone by volunteering to teach a class on legal rights for working families. "Your mother's coming today, isn't she?" I asked, noting how the mention of Sarah no longer carried the weight it once did. "Yeah," Michael nodded. "She's different now, Dad. That whole experience at graduation, it changed something in her. She told me yesterday that watching me choose integrity over influence made her realize how much she'd lost chasing the wrong kind of success." As if summoned by our conversation, Sarah's car pulled into the parking lot, but it wasn't her usual luxury vehicle. She'd traded that in for something more practical. She stepped out wearing clothes chosen for comfort rather than status, her face free of the artificial polish she'd once hidden behind. "I hope I'm not late," she said, approaching us. Traffic from Chicago was lighter than expected. The awkwardness that had once defined our interactions had been replaced by something else, a shared understanding that real value couldn't be bought or sold. "Perfect timing," I assured her. "The first group of mentees will be here soon." Robert. Wilson's car pulled in next, followed by Rick's truck. The contrast between the vehicles was still stark, but it no longer seemed to matter. They walked toward us together, discussing ideas for expanding the mentorship program to other communities. "James sends his regards," Robert mentioned as they joined us. "He's in New York, restructuring our internship program. Said he wants to make sure we're building real leaders, not just creating connections." The transformation in James had been unexpected, but genuine. The humbling experience at graduation had forced him to confront the hollow nature of bought influence, leading him back to the values that had built his father's company in the first place. Inside the community center, everything was ready. Classrooms were set up for tutoring and skills training. The workshop areas were equipped for hands-on learning. Even the cafeteria had been designed to encourage conversation and connection, with round tables that brought people together rather than keeping them apart. Mrs. Chen arrived with her first group of students, teenagers from various backgrounds, all eager to learn not just academic subjects, but life lessons about character and integrity. They carried themselves differently now, inspired by Michael's example to measure success by their impact rather than their income. "You know what I realized, Dad?" Michael said as we watched people filing in. "That day at graduation, when Mom and James tried to buy my future, they were actually offering me a shortcut around everything that makes life meaningful. The struggle, the growth, the real relationships. You can't buy those things, you have to build them." The watch on my wrist ticked steadily, marking time as more people arrived. Rick's daughter, Amy, now heading the youth outreach program. Diana, teaching a workshop on workers' rights. Local business owners ready to share real-world wisdom about building success through integrity. I got another call from the University of Chicago yesterday, Michael mentioned. They wanted to know if I'd reconsider their offer. Full scholarship, guaranteed internships, all the connections I could want. My heart skipped a beat. "And?" Michael smiled, the kind of smile that came from absolute certainty in one's choices. "I told them what you taught me. That real success isn't about taking shortcuts or buying influence. It's about building something genuine, something that lasts. Sarah, who had been standing nearby, wiped away a tear. "I was so wrong," she said softly. "All those years thinking I was protecting him from a small-town life, when really I was trying to shield him from the very things that build real character." The community center buzzed with activity now, filled with people who understood that true worth couldn't be measured in dollars or social status. Every person there represented a different aspect of genuine success: honest work, real relationships, earned respect. As the first mentorship session began, I watched Michael take his place at the front of the room. No expensive suit or designer accessories, just the authentic presence of someone who knew who he was and what he stood for. "Success isn't about rising above your community," he told his audience. "It's about lifting it up with you. It's not about how quickly you can climb the ladder, but about how many people you can help climb with you." The medals on my chest caught the light streaming through the windows, reminding me of all the battles that had led to this moment. Not just the dramatic confrontation at graduation, but the daily choices to choose right over easy, substance over status, integrity over influence. The watch Michael had given me marked each moment as we moved forward into this new chapter. Each tick a reminder that real success, like real character, isn't bought or inherited. It's built, one choice at a time, one day at a time, one life at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.